Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a unique tale on the vampire myth when I put Bill Gunn's Ganja Hess against Guillermo del Toro's Cronos. And this one was an interesting one to get through because both of these films have a very unique style and are definitely very much what you could call possibly art house movies, but dealing with like genre material, specifically the vampire myth. So first up, we have Bill Gunn's Ganja Hess, and now Bill Gunn was an actor who became a director, and this is probably his best known film, and it stars Dwayne Jones, who is most notable for George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and Marlene Clark, who is phenomenal in Switchblade Sisters, among many other films. And here, Dr. Hess, that played by Dwayne Jones, ends up stabbed by a stranger. He's out, off somewhere studying some ancient religion, and ends up stabbed with a dagger 3 times, and ends up becoming cursed, addicted to blood, so to speak, just like a vampire. So much like movies like Martin and The Addiction, this one deals with vampirism as basically being a junkie, which this one came before both of those movies. So one could say that, Martin and The Addiction are basically ripping off Ganja and Hess. Now, Dr. Hess ends up with an assistant, George Maida, played by Bill Gunn, and they kind of have a weird exchange. He ends up killing himself, and then we see Dr. Hess licking up the blood on the floor and all this stuff, and then Marlena Clark, who is Ganja, she shows up. She's Maida's wife, and she discovers all this shit going on, and so she wants kind of in on the lifestyle, and so Hess initiates her into vampirism, and then there's the thing about it is most of this movie is definitely an art house movie. Now, when it comes to like black art house films, this is one of the best, and it's one of the at times it can be sexy, times it can be disgusting, and at times it can be profound. But the problem I have with like art house movies is there's so much shit you can read into it that it makes you wonder, is that really what the filmmaker was trying to do? There's a lot of stuff where there's dialogue over B-roll, and there's some shots that are really great. James E. Hinton, the first black cinematographer, shot this film, and it is very unique, very artistic, but it just doesn't really play as a real movie. It's because it's like a lot of the stuff you kind of have to piece together, and it's explained to you as well. A lot of religious imagery and all this stuff. And so it just doesn't, at times you don't really know what the fuck's going on. But like I said, it can be sexy, it can be provocative, it just doesn't really grab you. But then we move forward to Guillermo del Toro's Cronos, which is about, it opens with kind of a historical context. An alchemist in the 1500s is, he's a watchmaker for some viceroy and shit, and he's charged with making a device that can give someone everlasting life. And, that is the Cronos device. And when he's discovered dead in 1937, that device kind of goes missing. And so there's people like looking for it, specifically this industrialist who's dying and he wants to not be dying. So he's had people out looking for this thing forever. And when they finally find it in some antique shop in Mexico, they send Ron Perlman, who's absolutely brilliant in the film. He's fucking sleazy as shit, and very quirky. This is very much a Guillermo del Toro film. This was his first film or first feature film, and you can very clearly see his voice in it. It's a very unique, playful fairy tale with great makeup effects, a great cinematography by Guillermo Navarro, and the acting in it is really good too. The old man who plays the antique dealer that owns the antique shop, he's absolutely brilliant in the film. Him and his granddaughter Aurora, or I think it's his granddaughter. It could be. You never know. But they're usually kid performances are fucking annoying as hell. This one is not, and there's a scene in it, where it can be playful at one point where we see Ron Perlman in the antique shop playing with the kid, with, teasing her with the gum and shit, and then asking about, what nose job he should get and shit like that. But then it becomes sinister real fucking quick when they figure out, like, this old man has the Cronos device, and he's not sure what the fuck he has, and it ends up, attaching itself to him, and then he becomes immortal. And, they try to kill him, but then he comes back from the dead because, that Cronos device fixed, made him immortal and shit. And so then he tries to investigate further on the thing, and it just, ends up killing Perlman and the industrialist and everything. It's just a really great fucking movie, and like an only type of film that like Guillermo del Toro could do. This is definitely some directors when they do their first movie. It's according to Danny Boyle, their first movies is their best movie, and I might say Cronos is Guillermo del Toro's best movie because it doesn't get bogged down in a lot of bullshit. It's definitely a very straightforward film, and it, like I said, it's a very dark, twisted, quirky fairy tale that is just absolutely brilliant, And like much like Ganja Hess, it deals with vampirism in a different light. Here with something that just makes you immortal, and you get a taste for like blood and insects and shit like that, and and it's just a lovely, well shot film, and the makeup effects are just absolutely brilliant. So, I mean, this round clearly has to go to Cronos because it's just the better movie. It plays better as a movie. Like, you can even consider Cronos to be an art house film. That's kind of the thing. Anytime a film is in a foreign language other than English, one tends to think of it as an art house film, whereas like it could just be a straight genre picture. And I would say Cronos is more of a genre picture than Ganja Hess is. Ganja Hess is like pure art house cinema where you don't really know what the fuck's going on, but you're drawn in by the imagery. But the whole point of this little self-indulgent scientific journey is to figure out for each round, which one is the better movie. And that means which plays better as a movie, which one follows the rules and all that good shit. And I would say Cronos definitely falls in that category. So for anybody keeping score, that is 76 to 58. The 70s are only up by 18 now. The 90s have broken their very long streak recently. And of course, like Guillermo del Toro is one of the greatest directors of all time, especially in the science fiction fantasy genre. And, just every film that he does is an absolute delight. And, not to discount what Bill Gunn achieved with Ganja Hess, especially at a time when blaxploitation films were kind of the norm for most black cinema. You didn't really see a lot of like actual black voices being heard in cinema and stuff. And whereas like, where blaxploitation was like the moneymaker at the time, you could get away with some of these like art house films because people were just so hungry for black entertainment in the 70s that they would allow you to make anything. So, but Cronos is the better movie, so it wins this round, 76 to 58. 70s are only up by 18. If I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. All this shit's open for debate. This is just one asshole's opinion. I'm on a self-indulgent scientific journey to figure out which decade was better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. 70s still have a significant lead, but the 90s are coming back. Like I said, they always throw a few 1-2 punches here and there. You'll see these bonus rounds pop up. The next main event will be Foxy Brown versus Jackie Brown. So that one should definitely be interesting. And any of you film professors that want to use this shit, let's talk compensation, because you know what? This is real brilliant shit, golden nuggets and stuff. And all the film bros out there, fight me on any of these opinions. I don't care. That's what the comment section is for. So watch out how the vampire bites you.